Okay, this video is called The Art of Chivalry, and again, my YouTube channel, I just do this as a hobby because I think this stuff is good and beautiful. The priority of the site is teaching about nutrition and prevention of disease and whatnot, but I also do these cultural videos, which I really enjoy doing because in a sense, I think that I know a lot of younger people. I know lots of doctors. I talk to them every day. Lots of people that don't know about this stuff, and there's this whole great tradition of art and culture that's not widely known. So I want to share some of the highlights of it. And there's a whole bunch of magnificent paintings from the legends of King Arthur and the times of the medieval knights and their whole mentality. There's something interesting about it. So the first painting here is called The Accolade by Edmund Leighton. And it's the idea of a knight is not just fighting for his country, he's also fighting for his church, his God, to do what is right. And that is sometimes why people even criticize the Catholic soldiers, that they had a sense of doing what was right, not just loyalty to country, but also loyalty to God and doing what is right. So they would be true friends of the poor and the weak. So he is being knighted, this young knight, and then here's a dedication with their lady, and they were very respectful and appreciative and protective of the ladies. Okay, this painting is called The Two Crowns by Frank Dixie from 1900, and the gist of it is, yes, he's the king and he's got a crown on his head, but he needs to remember Jesus Christu is the other king, and if he forgets that, he'll find himself in trouble. And so this is a good thing in the sense that there's an outside authority other than just the ruler of the town, and this outside authority says that everyone is equal in the eyes of God and has rights. If you don't have that in a society, then the rulers is equivalent to God, and whatever they say goes. So he looks up and he recognizes that his power is incumbent upon respecting the rights of the citizens. Okay, so it's a pretty standard thing. Cheval, by the way, means horse in French. Chevalier is like horsemanship. Chevalier is a nobleman, because only a wealthier person could own all the horses and get knights to go fight for them, and the king was dependent on them to help him out. So chivalry is sort of arose out of Catholic knights on horseback, and it progressively got bigger after the fall of the Roman Empire in 476 AD, because Rome used to protect towns, but once Rome was no longer an organized country, it was just a church, then people had to protect themselves. MacArthur has said it before, what causes war? Undefended wealth. So it has to be protected or somebody comes along and steals it. And this especially grew, this idea of chivalry and the knights, from the time of Charlemagne, the Carolingian Empire, and afterwards. King Arthur came out of the ideas of, it was thought that, again, once Rome, moved out of Britain, Britain was left unprotected, if you will. And so the King Arthur is related to the stories of men who had some experience working with the Romans and the Roman army and later helped defend Britain. Okay, so King Arthur, and then of course had the Knights of the Round Table, where everybody in a sense was somewhat equal, sitting at a round table. And so these knights were not just soldiers for the country, they were very big on duty, honor, service, also courtly manners, piety, and bravery in the face of evil. Here's a quote by Thomas Mallory, an author of one of the early versions of the King Arthur stories, and he said, "The very purpose of a knight is to fight on behalf of a lady." So here's St. George slaying the dragon, protecting the maiden there. And this has been part of societies, since the beginning of recorded time. And by the way, these are full of all these romances. So Tristan and Isolde is a story of Tristan the knight was sent to bring Isolde back to the kingdom. She used to marry King Mark, and there was a potion that they weren't supposed to have drank together, but inadvertently they did so, and it's a love potion, so they fell in love. They couldn't help being in love, and King Mark, of course, isn't happy about it, and there's a whole sort of beautiful, tragic, complicated story between Tristan and Isolde. It's a great romantic legend of the Middle Ages. And again, there's a lot of these paintings and this whole idea that the man's job is to protect the woman. And you'll see it over and over. So Chivalry by Frank Dixie, this one here, Overthrowing the Rusty Knight by Arthur Hughes. And Chivalry is full of these types of paintings and stories. There's the Rusty Knight, down below, cast off the bridge like the Billy Goat story. Okay, and then again, it's full of romance. Romeo and Juliet is sort of the young lovers, the young couples, star-crossed lovers, and the classic medieval romance is Abelard and Eloise. He was a great Aristotle professor, and she was a student. They fell in love, and man, there's a lot of complexities in that story. We're not going to go into that today. If you want, you can learn about lots of this stuff. The teaching company's got all kinds of audio CDs, DVD courses. There's a whole bunch of other ones too. The one by what's her name, Dorsey Armstrong, is good on King Arthur. I think she's a little bit of an airhead. I wasn't that impressed by her other courses, but her King Arthur course is quite good. All right, so here's the story of Lady Godiva, and she was a good lady who felt bad for the people getting taken advantage of by the Earl of Coventry, her husband, that he was taxing them excessively, and she protested to him, and he said, I'm not going to do anything about it unless you ride through town naked on a horse. And she agreed to do it. So here she is making her decision, then she agreed to do it. So this is Lady Godiva, painting by John Collier, this one by Edmund Leighton. And, you know, one of the points I'm making here is look how beautiful all this art is. It's magnificent. And, you know, it tells a story, again, thoughtful of the individual. You know, like Ayn Rand had said, the smallest minority is the individual. So individual rights are the most important if you want to have a society where everybody has a fair chance at a good life. Okay, and, you know, it honored women like St. Elizabeth. She was the daughter of a king, and despite her royalty, she devoted her life to helping the poor. And she became, you know, a member of the secular order of the Franciscans. So she wasn't a nun, but you could be a member of the order, the secular version of these religious orders, like the, you know, religious Catholic orders like the Franciscans after St. Francis of Assisi. And you can see she got a halo around her. She became a saint. She did all kinds of good things. And again, just the beauty of the paintings. Okay, stitching the standard, making the flag. It's just exquisite how beautiful it is. And this kind of stuff is over and over. So the Catholic and then Christian tradition, I have to give credit to the Protestants in England. After the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood of Artists, you know, especially as they were promoted and defended by John Ruskin in the 1853 speech. It's a magnificent speech. You can get it on YouTube. Just listen to the John Ruskin speech on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. They were a group of artists who said, in a sense, they wanted to capture the spirit of art from before Raphael. They saw Raphael as a little bit being arrogant, that he had elevated the status of the poets, if you will, to equality with that of God and whatnot. And that comes from in the Vatican and the Stanza Signatura, Raphael's paintings were put up on the wall at equal height, the one of Mount Parnassus with all the poets and the bards like Homer and whatnot, at the same level, and Aeneas at the same level as the religious painting like the Disputa about communion and all that. So they said they wanted to get a more pure essence into their art, and they did magnificent art. There was the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and that included painters like John Everett Millais. They're magnificent. And then there were sort of the later acolytes, if you will, of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And so I give them credit. The paintings are extraordinary. And the relevance being is usually I used to think that Protestants in general sort of stink at art because their churches are kind of boring inside compared with the Catholic churches full of magnificent statuary and paintings. But the Protestants through the Victorian age, man, they were magnificent painters. So again, here's Edmund Leighton's Lady Stitching a Standard, The King and the Beggar Maid, the idea of a chance at upward mobility. And again, a very, you know, they put women on a pedestal all the time, you know, and sort of there's modernist movements that act like, oh, women don't benefit from that. No, women benefit from that big time. I wish women would put men on a pedestal. I wish a woman would put me on a pedestal and treat me with respect. That'd be great. Yeah, I don't see that happening. Anyways, there was also the idea of courtly love and just this noble, almost religious love that a man serves a woman. And this is Dante in his youth when he first meets Beatrice. And there's Florence in the background, the beautiful city. And it's a very noble, courtly sort of love. This one's by Henry Holiday, this painting. Okay, and then I showed Dante because, you know, Dante was contemporaneous with the medieval knights. And this is their worldview. So this is sort of a biographical painting of Dante. This one's by Domenico Michelino. And so you can see here's the Inferno and hell. And he had journeyed from the Inferno to Purgatory, Mount Purgatory, you know, 7-story mountain. You've heard of Merton's book about that. And then the idea of heaven. And Beatrice was his guide there because she was already in heaven. She had died before he did. And then she guided him through heaven. And it's a rather magnificent story. Oh, this one painting I thought was kind of awesome. This guy's name is Dino di Durante. This is the cover of his book called The Inferno. It's a collection of paintings about Dante's Inferno. I think it's the best set of paintings I ever saw. I actually sort of did a parody. Oh, here's the joke. Where do you know where processed food is made? In Hell's Kitchen. I actually did a parody of this, in one of my books, Journey to Optimal Health, with regard to the river Styx, filled with caffeine. And I kind of made up this whole thing. I had a little fun with that. But be that as it may, this idea of heaven and hell, right and wrong, was very strong with the medieval knights. The Last Judgment by Michelangelo from 1541. Michelangelo's favorite book to read was The Divine Comedy by Dante. So he was heavily invested in this entire worldview in this magnificent painting of either Christ's arm goes up on the right, you go up to heaven, or down on the left, you go down to hell. So what's the definition of heaven? Life with Christ. What's the definition of hell? Life without Christ. Okay, and there was a strong educational sense to them. Aristotle, here's Aristotle the biologist pointing down. There's Plato, sort of the philosopher, pointing up. But they had a strong sense of connection to their past. The learning that they'd gotten from the Greeks and to some extent from the Romans as well, and what they learned from Roman architecture as well. The Renaissance, was able to incorporate all this stuff. And that's one of the great things about Christianity. It's syncretic. Syncretic means able to learn from past traditions and incorporate them in. And because of that, it's able to keep growing and learning. And the Renaissance was a great thing. It led to so much improvement in art and a lot of other things. Okay, this is just some stuff from the Legend of King Arthur. And again, the Dorsey Armstrong DVD course, I think, is a great way to learn it. I think Bullfinch Mythologies, he wrote a whole bunch about it. And I'm sure there's plenty of other courses on it. It's really noble, good stuff. It can get a little boring at times. I thought Bullfinch was a little boring. Dorsey Armstrong actually was more entertaining. So here's one of the stories, The Lady of the Lake. King Arthur's getting his sword restored, Merlin his friend. Obviously, there's tons more to it and tons more painting. We're not going to go into all that, but just to give you a sense of it real quick, here's the Knights of the Round Table, the idea of them being essentially equal. And that's one of the great things Christianity does. It prevents slavery. Ever since the beginning of time, slavery's been pretty standard, as well as, serfdom and low peasantry, the plebeians and all that, whereas Christianity says everybody's equal in the eyes of God, and that helps to give more rights to the individual. You could be born into poverty, but you could still raise yourself up from it. So here's the Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur, and there is the Holy Grail before them, that vision of the Holy Grail. And a lot of things are attributed to the Holy Grail. Is it the cup that caught the blood of Christ spilled by the Roman soldiers pierced in his side? Does it have magical healing powers? It's thought to. The movie about it was great too. That's the one Monty Python. That was Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's a funny movie. So anyways, a lot of pageantry. You'll catch this in the medieval knights, just sort of the glamour. And of course, this is a little later in the Palace of Versailles, but you can still see it's an era of swords and whatnot. And this is a magnificent painting called Reception at the Court of Versailles by Jean-Léon Gérôme. Okay. Now, this is also contemporaneous with Hamlet. So here's Hamlet with the play. There's the king. There's Ophelia. You can see the look on Hamlet's face as he observes the facial expression of the king. There's Hamlet's mother. And so all this stuff, it really plays well into stories and drama, all of the medieval knights and chivalry. And here, of course, partly of what made chivalry so famous, or at least the stories of King Arthur so famous, was all the romance. And that was a lot from the French. You sort of had the Welsh and the English, tell a lot of stories about the honor and duty, and greatness of the knights. And then the French kind of took over and added to some of the stories and brought a lot more love and romance in there, especially the affair between Guinevere, the wife of King Arthur, and Lancelot, the greatest of the knights in battle. And then there's a lot of this sort of romantic fantasy stuff you see a lot through the King Arthur stories. Now here's Lancelot, and the four princesses find him sleeping. There's the story, you catch some of this, spoofed on in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Here's Sir Galahad the Pure, where he's in the castle of all the maidens. So all these ladies are excited to see him, and he's trying to control his own excitement. Here's a painting of Sir Galahad the Pure, before he has to be pure in order to get the Holy Grail. Like Lancelot, although he's the greatest knight, he can't get it. And this painting obviously is funny in its own way, but Sir Galahad the Pure, all dressed in white, the colors of purity, is on his quest to find the Holy Grail. And here is Sir Galahad going further on his quest, and the angels are there, hopefully guiding him. And this is by Arthur Hughes. He's the same guy who made that painting about the Rusty Knight. It looks like he used the exact same bridge where the one where he had the Rusty Knight tipped over. So Galahad the Pure is trying to find his way to the Holy Grail. And there's a vision of it right there. And that Holy Grail, maybe it can heal people. So the Holy Grail, of course, in modern healing, think about it, God's way of healing. He gave you Genesis 1:29. I put every plant on earth for you to eat it. And then he also gave people sunshine. Adam and Eve were outside. He also gave man and woman, love, that they can help each other because we've got complementary skills and weaknesses. And together we can have children and enjoy raising them. And that's kind of like the Holy Grail of healing, is live like Adam and Eve, but with indoor heating and plumbing are a nice thing in the modern world. But anyways, here's a quote by Thomas Malory after the death of King Arthur. Yet some men say in many parts of England that King Arthur is not dead, that he shall come again and he shall win the Holy Cross. This is painting of the death of King Arthur by William Bell Scott. And that's a little bit of a Jesu Christu type legend about King Arthur. Will England ever recover from its sad phase of today? Here's some quotes by Edmund Burke. And who was Edmund Burke? He was an Irish guy. He was sort of half Catholic, half Anglican. He had to emphasize his Anglican aspect. His father was an Anglican lawyer in Ireland, in Dublin. And he went to England, became a member of Parliament, and he promoted freedom for the Catholics and the Americans. He spoke out against King George III when he was unfair to the Americans, and he predicted what would happen. He also spoke out against what had happened in France later in 1789 to 1793. The French Revolution, how that was a disaster in his opinion. And it was. Okay, the French Revolution has nothing like the American. The French was sort of a barbaric. The Americans was true push for freedom with great men like, Ben Franklin, George Washington, John Adams a little less so, but Thomas Jefferson certainly, they were great men. Madison, Okay, so anyways, here's a couple quotes from Edmund Burke, and then we'll get back to another set of paintings. We're almost done here, but the last set of paintings are magnificent. But I just want you just to hear a little bit of the thinking, kind of not contemporaneous, but not that far distant from the time of the medieval knights, and it's very similar in the way of thinking. Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it. Amongst a ruler who is generally corrupt, liberty cannot long exist. It is a general popular error to imagine that the loudest complainers for the public are to be the most anxious for its welfare. A lot of times people that complain a lot and say something's important, they're just doing that as a setup to get money out of you. Okay, Burke continues, It is enough for evil to triumph if good men do nothing. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. The people will not look forward to posterity who do not look backward to their ancestors. That's an important point. If kids don't know the history of their country, their religion, or of the other experts in whatever field they're going into, they're never going to produce anything, worthwhile. Great achievements come from knowing what's been done so far and figuring out how to improve on it. And for that to occur, you have to know what's been done so far, and that takes a lot of study and effort. Edmund Burke continues, The age of chivalry has gone. That of sophisters, economists, and calculators has succeeded, and the glory of Europe is extinguished forever. Yeah, there's a lot more phony experts than there are real experts, so one has to be very careful of who they trust and what they trust. Use your own judgment and try to verify things through, an extra source when possible. So anyways, here's Edmund Burke continuing. The people never give up their liberties, but under some delusion. Man is by his design a religious animal. Atheism is against not only our reason, but our instincts. Show me one absurdity in religion, and I will show you 100 in political laws and institutions. Yeah, people say, for example, this is my little aside, that, religion is just mythology and stuff, and that, real science and medicine is real. Yeah, right. Open up a textbook. What will you find? Treatment of coronary artery disease with stents and surgery. What's the cure rate with that? 0%. What's the treatment with low-fat vegan diet? 100%. How come low-fat vegan diet is not in the book? It's not in the book at all, okay? So how could that textbook, like the Harvard textbook of cardiovascular physiology, be based on science? I can assure you it is not. I've read it very carefully. And then it'll say, oh, well, hypertension is essential in 95% of patients, these Ivy League textbooks of medicine, so-called science. But they're BS, because we know that there's zero hypertension in populations that eat a plant-based diet and don't add salt to their food. Okay, we know that. So it's a question of 100, and what's the cure rate for a pill for hypertension? 0%, okay? So how could you say that book is based on science? No, it's not science at all, okay? It's sophistry. All right, let's continue with Edmund Burke. True religion, here's Edmund Burke continuing. True religion is the foundation of society. When that is shaken by contempt, the whole fabric cannot be stable or lasting. Learning, when religion is gone, will be cast into the mire and trodden down under the hoofs of a swinish multitude. Okay, he really feared that. He feared what happened in France with the French Revolution and what a disaster that was. Okay, he continues, despots govern, he says, they know he who fears God fears nothing else. Therefore, they eradicate God from his mind through their own Voltaire. Yeah, and that's very true. A ruler wants to be God. All rulers want total power. And as long as the population has religion, faith in God, and a sense of duty and honor to God, then they have an external authority that supersedes the ruler. So the ruler always wants atheism, because then he can control everybody and becomes the God. So that's why people benefit greatly by having religion. It protects them from an unfair ruler who wants a monopoly of power in their country. Okay, so Edmund Burke continues. Early and provident fear is the mother of safety. There is no safety for honest men except by believing all possible evil of evil men. And that's been my experience too. The average stupid person actually thinks that society likes them. Yeah, right. Society likes you. That's why you've got fluoride in your water, a neurotoxin to make you docile and stupid. That's why you've got soy, GMO soy sprayed with glyphosate, and GMO corn sprayed with atrazine to feminize you, make you weak, and to make you infertile, to sterilize you, to genocide you, you stupid idiot. And you think that society likes you? That's how people are so stupid. And because of that, they can't even conceive of society would perhaps want them to starve, would perhaps want them to be in bankruptcy and broke and go extinct. You know, the average person can't understand. It's obvious. It's always been this way since the beginning of time. That's why you got to read history to know anything about, you know, mankind and society. Okay, Edmund Burke continues. When bad men combine, the good must associate. Else they will fall one by one, an unpitied sacrifice and contemptible struggle. So that was Edmund Burke, who lived from 1729 to 1797. So he saw both the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And again, he was a promoter of freedom for the Americans and freedom for the Catholics, because he saw how the Irish abused the Catholics the British abused the Catholics in Ireland, and the Catholics in America didn't get treated so well in the beginning either. That's why they had to make their own separate school system. Okay, so now here's sort of chivalry for the individual. We're just going to tell a quick story of the individual. So here's the little prince, beautiful painting, big pageantry, and then the prince grows up, he's married, but here comes one of the head knights and tells him there's a call to arms, there's trouble afoot. So despite his lovely wife there, he must now go and do his duty. And these young lovers, she's so sad to see him leave that she just wants to trace his shadow on the wall. This is called The Shadow by Edmund Layton from 1890, to remember him while he's gone. The ships are there waiting below, and he shall soon have to leave. So these partings are such sweet sorrow. It's hard to say goodbye to someone you love and have a long-distance relationship. It's really hard. I went through that when I was young. Man, was it hard. But it was better than being alone. Meeting on the Church Stairs. This is a magnificent painting. This is by Frederick William Burton. He's an Irish artist. This was actually voted the most popular painting in the history of Ireland. It's a beautiful painting. Obviously, how sad it is to part. Young people, why must they part when they would so much want to be together? Here's Godspeed as she wishes him well as he goes off. She ties a garter handkerchief around his sleeve, and he must catch up with the rest of the guys to go. She'll stay home and take care of the babies. Here's another painting. This is from Edward Burne-Jones from 1890. He's one of the Raphaelite Brotherhood painters, Edward Burne-Jones. And so again, beautiful painting. One can catch, the sadness of the moment and the beauty of the moment there. And again, here's the idea of the Catholic knight. His allegiance was not just to the ruler. It was to the ruler, but it was also to God. And God is above the ruler. And that's why noble behavior was expected of them. No, did they always behave perfectly? No, of course not. But they were expected to, and they often did, and they did lots of good things. And in times of peril, who knows? You know, the city's under siege. Must they flee? Are they going to be starved to death? That's a common thing that is done to populations under siege, is to starve them to death. It's done to other populations too. It's a very easy thing to happen. So in Time of Peril by Edmund Layton, the knight is helping the family to flee. And, you know, the knights have trained for this. They've had tournaments and practice where they learn to joust and whatnot. And then there comes a time, and this is from the painting by N.C. Wyeth, about 1930, this beautiful painting. And here, Knights of Christ by Jan van Eyck from 1432. And now these guys have to fight. So anyways, that's sort of the beautiful history of chivalry and the art related to it. Hope that was interesting.